Hello everyone and welcome to this new section. In this section, we're going to cover a very important basics in programming in general, which is known as loops, okay? So we're going to cover mainly two major or two important types of loops, and we call them for loops and while loops, all right? And afterwards, we're gonna have tons of exercises ready for you, mainly dedicated to for loops and while loops. So let's get started. Let's see how can we actually create a loop first, and we'll see how can we go through it in so many different exercises and practice through many examples. All right, so let's get started. First of all, why do we need loops, or what's the point of having for loops? So the overall idea is that let's assume that we wanted, for example, to, let's say, print, for example, hello, okay? Very simple, basic line of code. So let's say if we press Shift Enter, you will find that you found here hello, right? All right, sounds good. What if you wanted to repeat this, let's say 10 times? All right, so maybe one solution, someone can say, okay, maybe we can copy this and paste it here and press Shift Enter, and then copy and paste it several times, Shift Enter, and so on. This is obviously not an efficient way of performing or of doing this, right? So obviously there is an easier way to repeat. If you wanted to repeat certain command several times, then we can use what we call it loops, which is a way of just, instead of repeating the exact same command several times within the code, you just write it once, and somehow you create a for loop in there to actually repeat it in a very kind of, it's just 2 lines of code. You can literally print like thousands of these hellos, all right? Okay, that's the overall idea of why do we need loops in general, and why do we need for a loop, for example, in particular, all right? Okay, so let's go ahead and actually delete all this, and let's get started and see how can we create our first loop. All right, let's assume that I wanted to, for example, I have a list, and this list, I call it my list, and I put there 1, 2, and 3, okay? And if I press Shift Enter, and if I take a look at my list, you will find that these are the 3 numbers, which is 1, 2, 3. Let's assume that I wanted, for instance, to print all these elements within my list. Like I wanted to print first element within the list, second element within the list, and then third element within the list. How can I do that? All right, so what you could do, you can then create a for loop to do it. So let's see how can we do that. First of all, this is the syntax of a for loop. We're going to say for I in, and then you write here the name of the list that you have here, which is my list. And then you put colon at the end, and then once you press Enter, you will find that here, basically there's an indent here. So you actually have, there's a space kind of in here. And that means that whatever we're gonna be writing here indicates that's the body of my for, okay? So that means whatever we're gonna be writing here, we're gonna be repeated several times depending on this. Again, I haven't discussed what's happening here, but let's see how can we do that. So I'm gonna say, okay, for I in my list, and what I'm gonna do, all right, so what you could do afterwards, you can say, okay, I wanted to print my variables I, okay? And if you press Shift Enter, here we go. Then you will find that there is numbers 1, 2, 3, which is all the elements contained within my list here have been printed. All right, so what happened here? Let's see how can we read it, okay? So what happened is here, as I'm saying, okay, for I, you can name it whatever you want. Here I call it index I, in, and then you indicate, let's say, the name of the list that you have, which is my list 1, 2, 3. And you simply, what you're saying is you're saying, okay, please go ahead, grab each and individual elements within that list. So for instance, first one, we're going to grab the first element, which is 1. So in the first run of the loop, I will have number equals to 1, okay? So I equals to 1 in the first loop, and then I'm gonna go here, I'm gonna say, okay, print that number, print 1, and that's why we've got print 1. And then what happened is, we're actually gonna go up again, and then we're gonna go here, take the second element within my list, and that's my second element, which is 2. So I, in this case, will contain the value associated with the second element in my list, which is 2. And then I'm gonna go here and print 2. Go up again, take the third element, and then go here and print it again, and that's why you printed number 3. All right, okay. And that's pretty much how can you run any for loops, which is very, very easy and very intuitive. So next step is, let's assume that I wanted, for example, to, let's say, print hello world 3 times. So I'm gonna say, okay, for I in, and I'm gonna say, let's say, my list, all right, which is simply what we have here. Okay, I know that there are 3 elements in here. Let's say, okay, for I in my list, I can simply do actually two things. I'm going to say, okay, print. I can print my variable I, which is exactly the same as before. And I can maybe do something as well. Maybe I'm going to go and print, let's say, hello world afterwards. Okay, so every time I'm going to go print I, so we're going to say, let's say, print 1, 2, and 3. And afterwards, after you print each of these numbers, you're going to print hello world. So press Shift Enter, and here we go. So now we come with number 1, which is here, and then afterwards you print hello world. Go up again, the second iteration within the loop. I'm going to print number 2, and then I'm going to print hello world. Go up again, then print number 3, and then print hello world, which is great. Okay, all right. So let's assume that I have, for example, a list of strings. Again, I'm just trying to expose you guys with, like, you know, like show you different examples within the for loop, okay, and how to create loops. So let's assume I have another list, and my list is defined as this. My list equals to, let's say, a couple of, let's say, fruits. I'm going to define them as apple. I'm going to define them as, let's say, blueberries. Blueberries, okay, it's actually double R here. And we are going to, let's say, specify mangoes, specify, let's say, watermelon. Actually, again here, watermelon. And maybe grab one more fruit as well. Let's call it apricots, for instance. Press Shift Enter. Here we go. Let's take a look at my list. Copy and paste. Let's take a look at it. Then you'll come up here with apple, blueberries, mangoes, and watermelon. Let's assume that I wanted to, for example, let's say, print all the elements within my string in here, within my list, okay, which is simply a list of strings. Okay, so what I could do, I'm going to say, okay, for I, or you can call it whatever, in my list, and then again you press colon, press Shift Enter. You will find that here we have got the tab. You're going to say print the value of I. That's it. Press Shift Enter, and here we go. First of all, you're going to go here, I in my list. So first we're going to go ahead and grab the first element within the list, which is apple. You're going to come here, you're going to say print apple. And then you go up again. You take the second element within my list, which is blueberries. You're going to come here, print blueberries. Or come again, mangoes, and so on. And that's why you're printing all of it here. Okay. All right. Sounds great. So afterwards, let's maybe take another example. Let's assume that I wanted, for instance, to create a loop, and that loop is going to be created over a string. All right, so what do you mean? So what we could do, we're going to say, okay, for I in, let's say I have a string here, it's called mangoes, for example, okay? Or just mangoes like this. And what I could do, I'm going to say, okay, every time, please go ahead and print I. So what's going to happen here, I'm going to say, okay, please go ahead for I in mangoes. So every time you're going to go here, grab a letter within the string. So first, we're going to grab the first letter, which is going to be M, and that's why I printed M. Go up again, you're going to get A, and that's why I printed A, and so on, and that's what's happening here. Okay? So simply put, what we have done so far is that we're able to go ahead in there, print, if you wanted to print, let's say, numbers within the list, I would be able to do that. If I wanted to, let's say, to print, you know, like hello world or whatever, I can do it here too. If I wanted to have a list as well, but that list contains strings in there, let's say apple, blueberries, whatever, then I will be able to print it as well. And I can also be able to go ahead, create a for loop that goes through the letters, each individual letters, okay, or characters, and actually print them as well. All right, and that's kind of the power of for loops. You can actually do it in a way that you can print whatever. You can print, you know, like characters within the strings. You can print strings within a list. You can print numbers within a list. You can repeat on whatever you wanted to do. All right, okay. So one more example. Let's assume that I wanted, for example, to have, let's say, a list of numbers, and I define these numbers as, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and let's say 6. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to sum up all these numbers. So I wanted to create a loop, okay, and this loop will simply gonna go ahead here and grab simply like a number, all right, and add it to kind of, you know, an accumulator. We'll call it accumulator. And then the next time I'm going to go in the iteration, take the second number, add it as well, the third number, add it as well, and that's what I'm going to keep doing until I actually sum all the numbers in there. So to do that, okay, first step, I'm going to say, okay, sum equals to 0. So when I say sum equals to 0, I can actually, let's call it, let's say sum of numbers equals to 0. And this is simply what we call an accumulator. This is just a variable that carries or accumulates all the variables or all the summation, let's say, or let's say multiplication and so on. And I initialize it to 0 first. And what I could do afterwards, we're going to say, okay, for number in numbers. All right, and that's kind of a famous way of actually writing kind of a for loop. Here I have a list of numbers, right? What I could do, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to create a for loop, and that for loop will go ahead here, take a number within numbers. Think about it. Okay, I'm going to take 1 and then for the first iteration, and then take 2 for the second iteration, and so on. So number will simply going to be assigned to each and every individual variable in here within my list. Afterwards, I'm going to say, okay, sum, all right, or sum underscore numbers, which is my accumulator, equals to sum underscore numbers plus number. All right. Okay. So what happened here? So what happened is I said, okay, let's go ahead and take my sum numbers, which is initialized to 0. So let's take a look at the for loop when we're actually just starting in the beginning. So what happened is numbers, for number in numbers. So numbers we have here have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 8, and 6. All right. So first iteration, I'm gonna go take number, the first one in numbers. So number here will have the value of 1. So here I have 1, right? So 1 plus some numbers, which has initialized to 0. So 0 plus 1 equals to 1. All right. So what we're doing, we're simply kind of overwriting every time, taking the sum numbers old, add number to it, and write it over to some numbers and create a new accumulator. And that's what we call it sum numbers new per se. So in the first iteration, what we're going to be doing, we're actually going to be adding 0 plus 1, and that should generate simply the new value, which is going to be 1. And what's going to happen is, in the second loop, we're actually going to go ahead again. I'm going to take the next number, which is going to be 2, right? So I'm going to come here at 2 plus 1, and that will become 3, and so on. I keep repeating this simply like several times, and that will be going to be actually our, let's say, second loop or second iteration. So second iteration will going to be, let's say, I'm going to take the new sum numbers plus 1, add to it the second value here, which is 2, all right, and that should generate number 3, and so on. And I keep repeating this several times until I actually finish all the numbers in here, and that should generate simply our accumulator. So what we could do afterwards, we're going to say, okay, print, and I'm going to print sum underscore numbers. All right, so press shift enter, here we go. So now we obtained some numbers, which is 21, which is basically the summation of 6 plus 5 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1. All right, so now it's time for a quick challenge. What I'm asking you guys to do is to repeat pretty much the exact same elements in here, okay, exact same code per se, but I don't want to obtain the sum of numbers. I wanted to get the multiplication of all numbers. So I'm going to get multiplication of all the elements, all the elements in the list. Please go ahead, pause the video, and maybe make some changes. Again, these numbers, keep it the same. Maybe some changes to here, maybe some changes to here, to just be able to obtain the multiplication of all these elements together. All right? Please go ahead, pause the video, and I'll see you guys after the challenge. All right, I hope you guys were able to figure out the challenge. So what I ask you guys to do is to simply copy this, paste it here, and instead of just summing all the numbers, I wanted to multiply all the numbers. In order to do that, let's actually remove this to avoid confusion. So in order to do this, simply put, what you guys could do, you can say, okay, I need to multiply all these numbers. So first of all, the accumulator here, I can't set it to 0, okay? Because 0 multiplied by any value will gonna be 0. I need to set that variable to 1. And instead of calling it sum numbers, I'm gonna call it, let's say, multiply, let's say, numbers. So let's say just, you call it whatever. Here I call it multiply numbers, which is simply contains the multiplication of all the values. And what I could do here, I'm going to say, okay, go to each number, grab the numbers, right? So I'm going to grab 1, 2, 3, and so on. Every time, instead of addition, I'm just going to make it multiplication. And instead of sum numbers, I'm just going to define it as multiply numbers. We're going to copy paste. And here I'm going to go ahead and multiply and print multiply numbers. All right, that's pretty much it. Press shift enter, and here we go. We'll end up with 720, which is simply the multiplication of all these numbers together. All right, I hope you guys were able to figure out the challenge, and I hope the lecture was pretty easy. And that will conclude our lecture. Let's go ahead and review what we have done so far. So in this lecture, we're able to get kind of, like a head start and learn how can we create a for loop. All right. And the overall idea of for loops is that we wanted to repeat a certain part within the code several times. And that's what we have done here. We're able to repeat and print, for example, all the elements within my list, which is 1, 2, and 3 here. And we're able as well to, let's say, if you wanted to, repeat like a print operation, like as we have done here. We printed the numbers and we printed as well hello world. And then afterwards, we'll be able as well to do is to print elements or strings within our list. So not just numbers, we can actually print as well strings, which is apple, blueberries, and so on. And then we're able as well to print characters too, such as, like if we do for I in, and then we define any string, then we'll be able to actually print all the characters within our string. And then finally here, we're able to create kind of a mini code that will help us to define an accumulator or repeat or sum all the elements within our list in here. And also for a mini challenge to multiply all the elements within the list. All right, that's pretty much all what I have for this lecture. I hope you guys enjoyed it. In the next lecture, I'm going to walk you through, again, more examples for the for loops. And that should conclude that section. And then we're going to move ahead to kind of more advanced forms of loops, such as while loops and different kind of loops, nested loops. I hope you guys enjoy this lecture and see you in the next one.